The Lawson estate had never felt so quiet. For decades, the mansion had been filled with laughter, business meetings, birthday celebrations, and the comforting sound of Richard Lawson's deep voice echoing through its grand halls. Employees came and went with smiles on their faces. Gardeners tended the colorful flowers, and visitors admired the magnificent home that overlooked the city skyline. Now, silence hung over every room like a heavy blanket. The marble floors reflected the soft glow of chandeliers that seemed dimmer than usual. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, each second reminding everyone that time had continued moving, even after tragedy. Richard Lawson was gone. The man who had built Lawson Manufacturing Group from a struggling workshop into one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country had taken his final breath just 3 days earlier after a brief but unexpected illness. News of his death spread across the nation within hours. Television stations interrupted regular programming to report the loss of one of the country's most respected businessmen. Newspapers published special editions celebrating his remarkable journey from a young mechanic with borrowed tools to a billionaire industrialist whose factories employed thousands of people. Politicians called him a patriot. Business leaders called him a visionary. His employees simply called him Mr. Lawson. To them, he had never been just another billionaire. He was the man who remembered birthdays, the man who personally visited sick workers in hospitals, the man who believed that the cleaner keeping the office spotless was just as important as the executive closing million-dollar deals. His greatest belief had always been simple. A company is only as strong as the people everyone forgets to thank. Those words had become almost legendary among his employees. Unfortunately, many people only appreciated them after he was gone. The day of the funeral arrived beneath gray skies that threatened rain. Hundreds of luxury cars lined the long driveway leading to the Lawson family estate. Black-suited security personnel directed traffic while journalists stood behind barriers hoping to capture photographs of the country's most influential figures arriving to pay their respects. Cabinet ministers stepped out of sleek government vehicles. International investors flew in on private jets. Famous entrepreneurs, entertainers, judges, religious leaders, and foreign ambassadors all came to honor the late billionaire. Employees from every Lawson manufacturing branch also attended. Some had traveled for more than 12 hours just to say goodbye. Many of them openly wept. Inside the beautifully decorated chapel, white lilies surrounded Richard Lawson's polished mahogany casket. A giant portrait beside it showed him exactly as everyone remembered. A warm smile, silver hair neatly combed back, and kind eyes that always seemed to see the good in people. Vanessa Lawson sat in the front row wearing a simple black dress. At 28 years old, she looked calm from a distance. But inside, she felt completely shattered. She barely heard the pastor's sermon. She hardly noticed the choir singing her father's favorite hymns. Every memory replayed itself inside her mind. She remembered learning to ride a bicycle while Richard jogged beside her, refusing to let her fall. She remembered sitting in his office as a little girl, pretending to answer business calls while he laughed. She remembered visiting the factories with him every Christmas, where he insisted they personally hand gifts to every employee. Most of all, she remembered the promise they had made to each other. "When you're ready," Richard had once told her, "this company will be yours, but never believe your office tells you everything. The truth always lives where ordinary people work." At the time, Vanessa had laughed. Now those words carried a weight she couldn't explain. One by one, speakers stepped onto the podium. Government officials praised Richard's contributions to the economy. Business partners described his brilliant leadership. Friends shared humorous stories from decades of friendship. Then Victor Kane approached the microphone. Victor had served as Richard's second-in-command for nearly 15 years and was currently the company's chief operating officer. He adjusted his expensive black suit before speaking. "My dear friend Richard was more than my employer." He paused dramatically. "He was my brother." Several people nodded sympathetically. Victor lowered his head. "I promise before everyone gathered here today that I will do everything in my power to preserve the company he sacrificed his life to build." The audience applauded politely. Vanessa looked at him without expression. She appreciated the kind words. Yet something about Victor's speech felt rehearsed. Too perfect, too polished. Still, she pushed the feeling aside. Perhaps grief was making her suspicious. After all, Victor had worked beside her father for years. Surely he wanted what was best for the company. Hours later, the funeral ended. People slowly approached Vanessa to offer condolences. "If you need anything, your father was an incredible man. He often spoke proudly about you. You'll make him proud." The words blurred together until they all sounded the same. She thanked everyone politely. By sunset, the mansion had emptied. The reporters were gone. The politicians had returned to their busy schedules. The flowers remained. So did the silence. Vanessa wandered into her father's private study. It was exactly as he had left it. Books neatly arranged on dark wooden shelves. Awards displayed in glass cabinets. Family photographs covering the desk. His reading glasses still rested beside an unfinished book. For a brief moment, she almost expected him to walk through the door. "Vanessa!" The familiar voice startled her. She turned to find Harold Bennett, the family's longtime lawyer, standing quietly in the doorway. Harold had served the Lawson family for more than 30 years. His hair had become almost completely gray, but his posture remained straight, and his calm demeanor had never changed. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said gently. She managed a weak smile. "It's all right." Harold stepped inside carrying a leather folder. "There is something your father instructed me to give you." He carefully removed a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. Across the front, written in Richard Lawson's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Vanessa. Open this only after they begin telling you what to do." Vanessa frowned. "What does that mean?" Harold shook his head. "I honestly don't know. He was very specific. He made me promise that no one else would see this letter." She looked down at the envelope. "When did he write it?" "About 6 months ago." 6 months? That was long before his illness became serious. Had he expected something? Harold hesitated. "There is one more thing." Vanessa looked up. "The board has scheduled an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning." "So soon?" He nodded. "They believe the company needs immediate leadership." She sighed quietly. "I suppose they're right." Harold studied her face. "Your father trusted your judgment. Don't allow grief to rush your decisions." After offering a comforting smile, he quietly left the room. Vanessa remained alone. The envelope rested in her hands like it carried the weight of the entire company. For several minutes she simply stared at it. Then she carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper smelled faintly of the cedar drawer where her father always kept his stationery. She unfolded it with trembling hands. "My darling Vanessa, if you are reading this, then I have already said goodbye. There is so much I wish I could still teach you, but life rarely gives us enough time. You have always been intelligent. You graduated with honors. You understand finance, marketing, operations, and international business better than many executives twice your age. But leadership cannot be learned inside a classroom." Tears rolled down Vanessa's cheeks as she continued reading. "By now, many people will suddenly become helpful. Some will tell you they know what I wanted. Others will insist they know how the company should be run. Listen politely, but believe no one immediately." She swallowed hard. The next lines made her heart race. "A company cannot be understood from the executive office. Beautiful reports hide ugly truths. Perfect presentations often conceal broken systems. If you truly wish to know who deserves your trust, then leave the boardroom. Walk the factory floors. Stand beside the cleaners. Eat with security guards. Talk to receptionists. Listen to the mechanics, drivers, technicians, and warehouse workers. The people with the smallest titles usually carry the biggest truths." Vanessa paused to wipe her tears. Her father had always believed ordinary employees understood a company better than executives. But why had he emphasized it so strongly? She continued reading. "Watch carefully. Observe people when they believe no one important is watching. Pay attention to how managers speak to those beneath them. Character reveals itself in moments no one expects to be remembered. Her breathing became slower. Every sentence felt less like advice and more like preparation. Then came the words that changed everything. Do not rush into my office simply because everyone expects you to. Earn your understanding before you exercise your authority. If you can understand the company from its foundation, no one will ever deceive you. Vanessa stared at the page for several long moments. It was unlike any succession plan she had ever imagined. Her father wasn't instructing her to seize power immediately. He was asking her to wait, to learn, to observe. She read the final paragraph. One last thing, my little girl. Never measure people by their titles, their salaries, or the cars they drive. Measure them by how they treat people who can do nothing for them. That single lesson built this company. It will protect it long after I am gone. I love you more than words can ever express. Lead with wisdom, lead with kindness, and never forget, the greatest leaders first become great listeners. Forever proud to be your father, Richard Lawson. Vanessa lowered the letter slowly. Her tears flowed freely now. Not because she had lost her father. She had cried for that already. These were different tears. They came from realizing he had still been protecting her. Even after his death. Outside the study window, the first drops of rain began falling onto the gardens Richard had loved so much. She walked toward the glass and looked out at the darkening sky. Tomorrow morning, the board expected her to walk into the executive conference room and officially begin her reign as CEO. They expected polished speeches, confident decisions, immediate authority. Instead, an entirely different idea formed inside her mind. She remembered her father's words. Observe people when they believe no one important is watching. A slow smile appeared through her tears. No one important. She whispered the words to herself. Then her eyes drifted toward the security gate at the far end of the estate. A uniform, a face no one would notice, someone invisible. For the first time since Richard Lawson's death, Vanessa felt something other than grief. She felt purpose. By the time dawn arrived, she had made the most unexpected decision of her life. She would not begin her journey as the billionaire CEO of Lawson Manufacturing Group. She would begin it as someone the entire company would overlook. The security guard. The executive boardroom on the top floor of Lawson Manufacturing Group was unlike any other room in the building. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooked the city's skyline. A polished mahogany table stretched from one end of the room to the other, surrounded by expensive leather chairs. Portraits of the company's milestones hung proudly on the walls. Its first factory, its millionth product, international expansion ceremonies, and at the center, a large photograph of Richard Lawson smiling beside hundreds of employees. The seat at the head of the table remained empty. It was Richard Lawson's chair. No one dared sit in it. At least not yet. The directors, senior executives, shareholders, and department heads spoke in hushed voices while waiting for the company's new owner to arrive. Everyone expected the same thing. Vanessa Lawson would walk through the doors dressed in an elegant designer suit, accompanied by lawyers and financial advisors. She would introduce herself as the new chief executive officer, reassure investors, and officially begin her father's succession plan. Victor Kane checked his expensive wristwatch for the third time in 5 minutes. Has anyone heard from Miss Lawson? He asked. Margaret Pierce, the human resources director, shook her head. Nothing. Thomas Reed, the chief financial officer, adjusted his glasses. She's probably overwhelmed. Losing a parent isn't easy. Victor nodded sympathetically, though inwardly he was growing impatient. The silence stretched for another 10 minutes before Harold Bennett, the Lawson family's attorney, entered the room carrying several legal documents. Everyone immediately stood. Victor forced a warm smile. Mr. Bennett, is Vanessa on her way? Harold calmly placed the documents on the table before answering. I'm afraid Miss Lawson won't be attending today's meeting. Confused murmurs spread around the room. Victor frowned. What do you mean she won't be attending? Harold maintained his composure. Miss Lawson has informed me that she will postpone assuming her duties as CEO. The room exploded with whispers. What? Postpone. For how long? Harold raised a hand for silence. She believes she needs time before taking over the company. Victor quickly hid the smile threatening to appear on his face. This was even better than he had hoped. Without Vanessa, he would continue serving as acting chief executive officer. More importantly, he would continue controlling every decision. I understand, Victor said with practiced concern. This must be an incredibly difficult period for her. We will keep the company stable until she's ready. Several board members nodded approvingly. Harold simply observed them. He knew something they didn't. Vanessa hadn't disappeared because she was afraid. She had disappeared because she was watching. Across the city, Vanessa Lawson stood inside a small apartment that looked nothing like the mansion she had grown up in. The apartment had one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a worn-out couch, and a narrow balcony overlooking a busy street filled with buses, motorcycles, and food vendors. It was modest, simple, ordinary, exactly what she wanted. The expensive designer dresses hanging in her mansion closet had been replaced with plain jeans, inexpensive blouses, and comfortable sneakers. The luxury handbags were gone. The diamond jewelry remained locked away in a safe at the family estate. She stood before the bathroom mirror studying her reflection. Her long silky black hair had been cut to shoulder length and tucked beneath a simple cap. She wore dark-framed glasses with plain lenses that subtly changed the appearance of her face. The elegant makeup she usually wore at social events had been replaced by a natural look that made her appear younger and less recognizable. She barely recognized herself. Her phone buzzed. It was Harold. "Everything is arranged," he said. "The security agency has accepted your application." Vanessa smiled. "Did anyone ask questions?" "Only why someone with your qualifications wanted security work." "What did you tell them?" "I told them exactly what you instructed. That you're rebuilding your life after caring for a sick parent." She sighed softly. "Thank you." Harold hesitated. "Are you certain about this? You don't have to prove yourself this way." Vanessa looked out the apartment window. "I'm not trying to prove myself. I'm trying to understand." She remembered her father's letter. "Listen to the people nobody listens to." Harold smiled through the phone. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so." 3 days later, Vanessa stood outside the offices of Shield Guard Security Services. The agency supplied security personnel to several major companies across the country, including Lawson Manufacturing. A middle-aged recruitment officer named Samuel welcomed the group of new hires. There were 8 of them. Most had previous experience in private security. Vanessa was the only woman. Samuel handed each applicant a form. "Before we begin," he said, "introduce yourselves." One by one, the recruits spoke. When it was Vanessa's turn, she smiled politely. "My name is Nina Brooks." She had carefully chosen the name after reading through hundreds of common surnames. Nothing about it attracted attention. "Do you have previous security experience?" Samuel asked. "No." "What did you do before this?" "I took care of my father while he was ill." The room grew quiet. Samuel nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." He made a note on her application. "You'll receive additional training." The following week passed quickly. Vanessa learned everything she never imagined security officers did. They weren't just guards standing by doors. They monitored surveillance systems. They checked visitor credentials. They responded to emergencies. They escorted deliveries. They completed incident reports. They watched for suspicious behavior. They protected employees. The instructors emphasized one important rule. A good security officer notices everything. Vanessa almost laughed. That was exactly why she had come. Friday morning finally arrived. Her first assignment had been confirmed. Lawson Manufacturing Group headquarters. She stood outside the enormous glass building just before 7 o'clock wearing a navy blue security uniform. The uniform was neatly pressed. A security badge displaying her new identity read, "Nina Brooks, Security Officer." She stared at the company logo mounted high above the entrance. Her father's name was still engraved beneath it. For a brief moment, Emotion threatened to overwhelm her. She had entered this building hundreds of times as Richard Lawson's daughter. Executives had welcomed her. Receptionists greeted her by name. Doors opened before she reached them. Today, no one even looked at her. It was strangely liberating. A senior guard named Patrick approached. "You must be the new recruit." She nodded. "Yes, sir." He smiled. "No need for sir. Around here I'm Patrick." He handed her a radio. "I'll show you around." Together they walked through employee entrances, loading bays, security stations, emergency exits, and surveillance rooms. Patrick explained everything patiently. "You'll spend the first few weeks at reception and floor patrol." Simple enough. As they walked through the lobby, executives hurried past without acknowledging the security staff. One man nearly bumped into Vanessa without apologizing. Patrick chuckled. "You'll get used to being invisible." Vanessa looked at him. "Invisible?" He nodded. "People don't notice security unless something goes wrong." She silently thought of her father's words. Observe people when they believe no one important is watching. Already, it was beginning. By mid-morning, employees flooded into the building. Vanessa greeted each person politely. "Good morning." Most ignored her. Some barely nodded. A few didn't even make eye contact. One executive tossed his visitor badge toward her without slowing down. Another barked impatiently. "Hurry up." She simply smiled. Every interaction taught her something. Status changed behavior. People treated those in uniforms very differently. Around lunchtime, she carried a small tray toward the company cafeteria. Unlike the elegant executive dining room upstairs, this cafeteria served ordinary employees. She found an empty seat near the corner. As she stood up to collect a bottle of water, someone accidentally bumped into her. The tray slipped from her hands. Plates crashed loudly onto the floor. Rice scattered everywhere. Soup splashed across her uniform. Conversations stopped. Then laughter echoed through the cafeteria. One employee shook his head. "First day already causing trouble." Another smirked. "Security should stick to guarding doors." Vanessa knelt to clean the mess. Embarrassment warmed her cheeks. Suddenly another pair of hands appeared beside hers. "It's okay." She looked up. A tall man in his early 30s was already helping gather the broken dishes. He wore a simple white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, dark trousers, and an employee identification card that read, "Daniel Brooks, Operations Manager." He smiled kindly. "Accidents happen." "It's my fault," Vanessa said softly. Daniel shook his head. "No, the floor's slippery." He carefully picked up the remaining pieces before signaling one of the cafeteria attendants. "I'll help clean this." Within minutes everything had been cleared away. Daniel noticed her untouched lunch lying ruined on the floor. "You haven't eaten." "I'll be fine." He smiled. "No, you won't." Before she could protest, he walked to the serving counter. A minute later he returned carrying another tray. "This one's on me." Vanessa blinked in surprise. "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." She hesitated. "Thank you." Daniel sat across from her. "So?" He smiled warmly. "First day." She nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "You've still got that. I'm trying to remember everything they taught me. Look." She laughed quietly. "I probably do." "I'm Daniel." "Nina. It's nice to meet you." They shook hands. Unlike many others she had encountered that day, Daniel looked directly into her eyes while speaking. Not once did he glance at her uniform with superiority. Instead, he treated her exactly as he would any colleague. They ate together while talking about ordinary things. The city, the weather, the long hours security officers worked. Daniel asked where she was from. She carefully repeated the story she had prepared. "I've been away for a while taking care of my father." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He nodded understandingly. "I lost my parents a few years ago." The sincerity in his voice immediately softened the conversation. "I'm sorry," Vanessa replied. He smiled gently. "It gets easier. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually." For a moment, Neither of them spoke. Then Daniel stood. "I should get back." He picked up his tray. "It was nice meeting you, Nina." "You too." As he walked away, Vanessa watched him greet nearly everyone he passed. Receptionists, technicians, maintenance workers, even the elderly cleaner mopping the hallway. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Grace." The cleaner smiled brightly. "Good afternoon, Daniel." Vanessa noticed something remarkable. Daniel never changed the way he spoke depending on who stood before him. Respect came naturally to him. She quietly reached into the small notebook hidden inside her pocket and wrote her very first observation. Daniel Brooks, operations manager, kind to employees regardless of position, helped a security guard without expecting recognition, speaks respectfully to everyone, genuine. She closed the notebook. A small smile spread across her face. It was only her first day. Already, her father's lesson was proving true. The people who revealed the most character were not the ones sitting in luxurious offices. They were the ones who thought no one important was watching. And for the first time since putting on the security uniform, Vanessa realized she hadn't simply started a job. She had begun uncovering the true heart of the company her father had left behind. By the end of her first week as a security guard, Vanessa Lawson understood something her father had spent years trying to teach her. People rarely revealed their true character to a CEO. They revealed it to people they believed did not matter. Every morning, she put on the navy blue security uniform, tied her shoulder-length hair into a neat ponytail beneath her cap, clipped on the badge that read Nina Brooks, and reported for duty before sunrise. Every morning, she disappeared. No one looked twice at a security guard standing by the entrance. Executives walked past while discussing confidential deals without lowering their voices. Department heads barked orders at junior staff. Visitors barely acknowledged the guards who checked their identification. Vanessa had never felt so invisible. And strangely, she was beginning to enjoy it. Because invisible people heard everything. The headquarters of Lawson Manufacturing came alive before 8 o'clock every morning. Delivery trucks rolled into the loading bay carrying raw materials. Engineers hurried toward the production floor carrying blueprints. Receptionists answered an endless stream of phone calls. Employees gathered around the coffee machines discussing deadlines, promotions, office gossip, and company rumors. Vanessa quietly observed it all. She greeted every employee with the same warm smile. "Good morning." Some smiled back. Most ignored her. A few looked at her as if she were part of the furniture. Patrick, the senior security officer assigned to mentor her, noticed she was unusually observant. "You ask more questions than any recruit I've trained," he said one afternoon as they monitored the surveillance room. Vanessa smiled. "I like understanding how things work." Patrick laughed. "Then you've joined the right place." He leaned back in his chair. "You know, most people think security is about catching thieves. It isn't. It's about noticing patterns." "What kind of patterns?" Vanessa asked. Patrick pointed toward one of the surveillance monitors. "See that maintenance worker?" She nodded. "He always arrives exactly 15 minutes early." Patrick switched to another camera. "That sales manager? He leaves exactly at 5 every day." Another camera. "The warehouse supervisor? He checks every delivery personally." Patrick folded his arms. When people's routines suddenly change, something usually happened. Vanessa nodded thoughtfully. Her father would have liked Patrick. He understood people. Later that afternoon, Vanessa was assigned to patrol the executive floor. The polished marble hallway looked immaculate. Expensive artwork decorated the walls. Fresh flowers sat in crystal vases. Everything appeared perfect, almost too perfect. As she walked past the finance department, raised voices drifted through a slightly open office door. She instinctively slowed her pace. "You've changed the figures again." It was Thomas Reed, the company's chief financial officer. Another man answered nervously. "The auditors requested clarification." Thomas's voice hardened. "I didn't ask what the auditors requested. I asked whether the numbers were changed." "Yes." A heavy silence followed. Thomas spoke again. "Correct them." But those are the actual expenses. I don't care. Vanessa's heartbeat quickened. She casually continued walking before anyone noticed her lingering nearby. She couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but one sentence echoed in her mind. Those are the actual expenses. What exactly was being hidden? That evening, while changing shifts, Vanessa met someone she had noticed several times but never spoken to. An elderly woman slowly pushed a cleaning cart through the hallway. Her silver hair was neatly tied beneath a scarf, and despite her age, she worked with remarkable energy. Daniel passed by carrying several files. "Good evening, Mrs. Grace." The woman's tired face immediately brightened. "Good evening, Daniel. Working late again?" She chuckled. "When you're my age, you either keep moving or your knees remind you who's in charge." Daniel laughed. "Take care of yourself." "I will." After Daniel disappeared around the corner, Vanessa approached. "Can I help you with the cart?" Grace smiled kindly. "That's sweet of you. I'll manage." "I'm Grace." "Nina, the new security officer?" Vanessa nodded. Grace smiled warmly. "Welcome to Lawson Manufacturing." Unlike many employees, Grace spoke with genuine kindness. No superiority, no impatience, only warmth. Over the following days, they often crossed paths during evening shifts. Eventually, their brief greetings turned into conversations. One quiet evening, they sat together during a short break outside the building. The sun was setting behind the skyline, painting the clouds shades of orange and gold. Grace sipped tea from a small flask. "You know," she said, "I've worked here for 23 years. Vanessa looked surprised. "That's longer than some executives." Grace laughed. "Oh, much longer. I started cleaning these offices when there were only 2 buildings. She smiled at the memory. Back then, Mr. Lawson walked through every department himself. Vanessa remained silent. Grace continued. "He knew every cleaner's name. If one of us was sick, he'd ask where we were. Every Christmas, he handed us gifts personally." Vanessa smiled softly. "That sounds like him." Grace looked at her curiously. "You met him?" "You met him?" Vanessa carefully nodded. "Only a few times." Grace sighed. "The company changed after he became ill." "What do you mean?" Grace looked around to ensure no one was nearby. "People became afraid." "Afraid?" She nodded. "Managers stopped listening. Supervisors started shouting. Executives became different." She lowered her voice. "Especially Mr. Kane." Vanessa's attention sharpened. "What about him?" Grace hesitated. "I shouldn't gossip." "It's all right." Grace looked uncomfortable. "He wasn't always like this. But after Mr. Lawson got sick, he started acting like the company already belonged to him." Vanessa remained calm despite the knot forming in her stomach. "What kind of things?" Grace sighed deeply. "Workers are dismissed without proper investigations. Overtime payments disappear. Promotions suddenly go to people with connections. And nobody dares question management anymore." Vanessa thanked her quietly. That conversation stayed with her long after her shift ended. The following Monday, Vanessa witnessed something that disturbed her deeply. She was patrolling the warehouse when shouting echoed across the loading dock. A young employee stood trembling before a furious warehouse supervisor. "I said check the shipment numbers." "I did, sir." "Then explain why these boxes are missing." I don't know." Several workers gathered nearby, watching nervously. The supervisor raised a finger toward the young man. "You're fired." The employee's face turned pale. "Sir, please. I've worked here 3 years. I have a wife and 2 children. I didn't steal anything." "I don't care. Pack your things." The young man lowered his head in defeat. Just then another voice interrupted. "What happened?" Everyone turned. Daniel Brooks had arrived. The supervisor immediately straightened. "Nothing serious." Daniel looked at the frightened employee. "Then why is he being fired?" The supervisor folded his arms. "Missing inventory." Daniel frowned. "Has the investigation been completed?" "No." "Then how do you know he's responsible?" The supervisor hesitated. He was on duty. Daniel remained calm. Being on duty isn't evidence. The supervisor's expression hardened. Operations isn't responsible for warehouse discipline. No, Daniel agreed. But fairness is everyone's responsibility. A heavy silence settled over the loading dock. Daniel walked toward the shipment records lying on a nearby table. He carefully reviewed the documents. Within 2 minutes, he looked up. These deliveries were counted twice. The supervisor blinked. What? Daniel pointed toward 2 identical barcode entries. The system duplicated yesterday's shipment. There are no missing boxes. The young employee stared in disbelief. The supervisor's face flushed with embarrassment. Daniel calmly handed back the paperwork. I think someone owes him an apology. Without another word, Daniel walked away. The supervisor reluctantly muttered, "Get back to work." The young employee whispered, "Thank you." Vanessa watched everything. No cameras. No executives. No audience. Daniel had intervened simply because it was the right thing to do. That evening she opened the notebook hidden inside her locker. Under Daniel's name she added another observation. Stopped wrongful dismissal. Verified facts before making judgment. Defended junior employee despite risking conflict with management. Integrity under pressure. She closed the notebook thoughtfully. Her father had written, "Measure people by how they treat those who can do nothing for them." Daniel passed every test without even knowing he was being observed. Days turned into weeks. Vanessa quietly built a routine. Morning patrol. Lobby security. Loading dock inspections. Evening rounds. Between assignments she listened, observed, learned. She discovered which departments respected one another, which managers intimidated employees, which workers genuinely cared about the company's success. She also noticed unusual financial behavior. Several expensive machines left the warehouse after business hours with authorization forms signed by departments that denied requesting them. One evening she politely asked Patrick, "Does expensive equipment usually leave this late?" Patrick shrugged. "Only with executive approval." "Who signs the paperwork?" "Usually finance." Vanessa made another mental note. Later that night, she secretly wrote down the truck registration numbers leaving the premises. She didn't yet know what they meant, but her instincts told her they mattered. Toward the end of the month, Daniel found Vanessa sitting alone outside during her dinner break. He carried 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this." She smiled. "You keep rescuing me." He laughed. "Today's rescue is caffeine." She accepted the cup gratefully. "Thank you." They sat quietly for a moment. Daniel noticed her thoughtful expression. "Long day." She nodded. "I'm learning." "About security?" She looked toward the company building. "About people." Daniel smiled knowingly. "You picked an interesting place." "What do you mean?" He leaned back. "Companies aren't really built by buildings. They're built by people. Some make them stronger. Others slowly destroy them." Vanessa looked at him carefully. "And how do you tell the difference?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Watch how they behave when nobody important is around." Vanessa nearly laughed. It was almost identical to her father's advice. She looked at Daniel with renewed curiosity. Maybe greatness didn't always come with wealth. Maybe wisdom wasn't reserved for billionaires. Perhaps her father had surrounded himself with extraordinary people, people no one else appreciated. As the sun disappeared behind the skyline, Vanessa realized something unexpected. She had entered Lawson Manufacturing believing she was investigating a company. Instead, she was discovering the hearts of the people inside it. Some hearts were driven by greed, others by fear, but a precious few, like Grace and Daniel, still carried the kindness and integrity that Richard Lawson had spent a lifetime building into his company. And although the corruption lurking beneath the surface was becoming clearer each day, one thing was becoming even clearer to Vanessa. Her father's greatest legacy had never been the factories, the profits, or the billions of dollars. It was the people who still believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. A month had passed since Vanessa Lawson exchanged the luxury of the executive suite for the navy blue uniform of a security guard. The disguise had become second nature. Each morning she woke before dawn in her modest apartment, made herself a simple breakfast, tied her hair neatly beneath her security cap, and boarded the crowded city bus with office workers, mechanics, nurses, and construction laborers. No chauffeur, no luxury SUV, no personal assistant. She stood shoulder to shoulder with ordinary people who worried about paying rent, buying groceries, and raising families. For the first time in her life, she understood what her employees experienced before they even arrived at work. It humbled her, but it also made her more determined. Every day revealed another piece of the company her father had left behind, and every day convinced her that something was deeply wrong. One Monday morning, Patrick assigned Vanessa to the executive floor again. "The chairman's office is hosting investors today," he explained. "They'll need extra security." Vanessa nodded. "I'll take care of it." She stood quietly near the elevators, greeting visitors and checking identification badges. Executives hurried past in expensive suits, carrying laptops and leather briefcases. As always, most of them barely acknowledged her presence. One investor smiled politely. "Good morning." Vanessa smiled back. "Good morning, sir." The simple exchange lasted only a few seconds. Yet immediately afterward, one senior executive laughed. "You don't have to be so friendly to security." The investor frowned. "Why not? They're just doing their jobs." The executive shrugged. "I suppose." He walked away without another word. Vanessa noticed the investor looking after him with mild disappointment. She quietly made another observation. Respect could never be faked. It appeared naturally or not at all. Around noon, she was making her routine patrol when she noticed two men wheeling a large wooden crate toward the freight elevator. The label on the crate immediately caught her attention. Precision Robotics Unit. The equipment inside was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She approached politely. "Good afternoon. May I see the transfer authorization?" One worker handed her a folder. Everything appeared normal. The paperwork carried official company stamps and signatures. Still, something felt unusual. She glanced at the destination. Instead of one of Lawson Manufacturing's factories, the shipment was headed to a private storage facility across town. She frowned. "I haven't seen equipment transferred there before." One worker shrugged. "We're just following orders." "Who approved it?" "The finance department." Vanessa returned the documents with a smile. "Thank you." As the workers disappeared into the freight elevator, she quietly wrote down the truck's registration number in the small notebook she always carried. She couldn't prove anything. Not yet, but her instincts whispered that the shipment mattered. Later that afternoon, she stopped by the surveillance room. Patrick was reviewing camera footage while drinking coffee. She casually asked, "Do expensive machines leave headquarters often?" Patrick looked surprised. "Not really. Most equipment goes directly between factories." "So private storage facilities aren't common?" He shook his head. "I've worked here 12 years. I can count those transfers on one hand." Vanessa looked thoughtful. "Interesting." Patrick laughed. "You think like an investigator." She smiled. "Maybe I watch too many detective movies." Patrick chuckled, unaware of how serious she actually was. The following day, Vanessa's curiosity led her to the accounting department. Not inside the offices, just outside. Her patrol route required her to check emergency exits every hour. As she passed the finance corridor, she heard raised voices coming from Thomas Reed's office. The door wasn't fully closed. She slowed her pace naturally without appearing suspicious. "I told you these figures don't match." It was Thomas. Another nervous voice replied, "The original invoices are still in the system." Thomas sounded irritated. "Then delete them." "I can't. The audit software logs every change." Silence. Thomas sighed impatiently. "Then create replacement invoices." "But I don't want excuses. I want solutions." Vanessa continued walking before anyone noticed her nearby. Her pulse quickened. Her father had often told her that financial fraud rarely began with large thefts. It began with small lies. One altered invoice, one hidden payment, one missing receipt. Then the lies multiplied until no one remembered the truth. That evening, Grace found Vanessa sitting quietly outside during her dinner break. "You look troubled." Vanessa smiled faintly. "Just thinking." Grace sat beside her. "I've learned something in 23 years. "What's that?" "When a building starts cracking, it's usually because the foundation is weakening." Vanessa looked at her curiously. "What makes you say that?" Grace sighed. "I hear things. Cleaners always do." She smiled knowingly. "People talk while we're emptying trash." Vanessa laughed softly. "I suppose they forget you're there." "Exactly." Grace lowered her voice. "Several employees have resigned recently." "I know. They didn't leave because of better salaries. They left because they couldn't work under Mr. Kane anymore." Vanessa frowned. "Did they say why?" Grace nodded slowly. "They felt pressured to approve things they knew were wrong." "What kind of things?" "I don't know. They never explained. They just said the company wasn't the same after Mr. Lawson became sick." Vanessa stared toward the headquarters building. Every conversation seemed to point toward Victor Kane. But suspicion wasn't proof. She needed evidence. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. 3 nights later, Vanessa was assigned to the late shift. Most employees had gone home. The building felt unusually quiet. Only security officers, maintenance staff, and a handful of executives remained. At approximately 9:40 p.m., she noticed Victor Kane leaving his office. Instead of heading toward the elevators, he walked to the executive conference room. A few minutes later, Thomas Reed arrived. Then Margaret Pierce from Human Resources. The 3 entered together. The conference room blinds were closed. The lights remained on. Vanessa checked the hallway. Empty. She quietly continued her patrol until she reached the emergency stairwell located beside the conference room. The stairwell shared a ventilation opening with the meeting room. Sound carried surprisingly well. She stood just inside the stairwell, pretending to inspect the emergency exit while listening. Victor spoke first. "The shareholders are becoming impatient." Thomas answered, "Without Richard, they're asking questions. They'll stop asking once I'm officially confirmed." Margaret sounded uncertain. "What about Vanessa?" Victor laughed. The sound sent a chill through Vanessa. "The girl has disappeared. Maybe grief overwhelmed her. Maybe she realized she's not capable. I don't care. As long as she stays away. This company is practically ours." Vanessa's stomach tightened. Victor continued, "The financial transfers must continue." Thomas hesitated. "The numbers are becoming difficult to hide." "Then hide them better." "And Daniel Brooks?" Margaret asked. Victor's voice hardened. "He's becoming a problem. He questions too much. He protects employees. People trust him." Thomas replied, "He'll never support us." Victor answered coldly, "Then we'll make sure no one trusts him." Vanessa felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. They weren't simply stealing. They were planning something against Daniel. She wanted to hear more. Suddenly footsteps echoed from the hallway. Another security officer approached. "Nina?" She stepped away from the stairwell immediately. "Yes. I've been looking for you. We're rotating patrol routes." Vanessa forced a calm smile. "I'm coming." As she walked away, her mind replayed every word she had just heard. "This company is practically ours." The sentence echoed over and over. That night she barely slept. She sat at the small table inside her apartment with her notebook open. Page after page contained observations. Dates, truck numbers, conversations, employee names, behavior patterns. She carefully wrote everything she had overheard. She knew verbal conversations alone wouldn't expose Victor. She needed documents, financial records, video evidence, something undeniable. Still, the notebook was growing into a map of corruption. Her father had been right. Beautiful offices could hide ugly truths. The next morning, Daniel found her standing near the reception desk. You look tired. Vanessa smiled. I didn't sleep well. Everything all right? Just thinking. Daniel laughed. You spend a lot of time thinking. She smiled. I suppose I do. He handed her a paper cup. Coffee. She accepted it gratefully. You're going to spoil me. I hope not. They laughed together. For a brief moment, the weight on Vanessa's shoulders became lighter. Daniel noticed her thoughtful expression. Can I ask you something? Of course. You always ask questions about how the company works. You notice things most people ignore. Why? Vanessa hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth. Instead, she answered honestly, just not completely. My father used to tell me that understanding people is more important than understanding business. Daniel smiled. Smart man. He was. Daniel looked around the busy lobby. You know, I've worked here almost 8 years. I've seen companies succeed. I've seen departments fail. But one thing never changes. What? When leaders stop listening, everything starts breaking. Vanessa stared at him. It was another lesson almost identical to her father's. She wondered if Richard Lawson had seen Daniel's potential years ago. Perhaps that was why Daniel had remained with the company despite never receiving the promotions he deserved. Thank you, she said quietly. Daniel looked confused. For what? For reminding me that good people still exist. He smiled warmly. There are more than you think. As he walked toward the elevators, Vanessa watched him greet every employee he passed, just as he always did. The receptionist, the cleaner, the delivery driver, the intern carrying a stack of files. To Daniel, every person deserved respect. He never knew someone was quietly measuring his character every single day. Vanessa looked up at the enormous Lawson Manufacturing logo hanging above the lobby. Her father's company was still standing. Its walls were solid. Its profits appeared healthy. Its reputation remained respected. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But beneath that polished surface, the foundation was beginning to crack. Greed had quietly taken root. Power had replaced service. Fear had replaced trust. And somewhere inside those cracks, people like Victor Kane believed they had already won. Vanessa tightened her grip on the paper coffee cup. They had no idea the woman they were waiting to disappear had been standing among them all along, watching, listening, remembering every lie. And when the time came, every crack they had tried so desperately to hide would bring their entire scheme crashing down. 2 months had passed since Vanessa Lawson walked into Lawson Manufacturing Group wearing a security uniform and introduced herself as Nina Brooks. What had begun as an undercover mission was slowly becoming something much more personal. Every day she uncovered another example of corruption. Every day she added new names, dates, conversations, and suspicious transactions to the notebook hidden inside her apartment. But amid the lies, manipulation, and greed, she had also discovered something she never expected. Kindness still existed, and much of it came from one man, Daniel Brooks. The company cafeteria was unusually crowded that Tuesday afternoon. Employees lined up for lunch while conversations filled the room. Some discussed upcoming projects. Others complained about impossible deadlines. A few whispered about another round of budget cuts. Vanessa collected a tray and searched for an empty table. Before she could sit down, a voice called out, "Nina!" She turned. Daniel was waving from a table near the window. "There's room here." She smiled and walked over. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." Across from Daniel sat another manager named Eric Collins. Eric glanced at Vanessa's security uniform before returning his attention to his meal. Daniel noticed. "This is Nina. She's one of our new security officers." Eric forced a polite smile. "Oh." He nodded briefly. "Nice to meet you." His tone made it clear the conversation was over. For several awkward moments, only the sound of cutlery filled the table. Then Eric checked his watch. "I have another meeting." He gathered his tray and left. The moment he disappeared, Daniel sighed dramatically. Vanessa laughed. "You scared him away?" "I was about to ask you the same thing." They both laughed. Felt effortless. Daniel smiled. I think some people still find it strange that I eat lunch with everyone. What do you mean? He shrugged. Apparently, managers are expected to sit with other managers. And executives sit with executives. And security. They sit with security. Vanessa looked around the cafeteria. He was right. Different departments naturally separated themselves. Almost like invisible walls divided the room. But food tastes the same wherever you sit, Daniel continued. So I never understood the rules. Vanessa smiled warmly. My father used to say something similar. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh. He believed titles shouldn't decide who deserves respect. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I would have liked your father. You would have. She answered so quickly that she almost forgot herself. Daniel smiled. He sounds like a wise man. He was. Vanessa quietly looked down at her tray to hide the sadness in her eyes. Later that week, heavy rain poured across the city. Dark clouds covered the sky, and strong winds rattled the glass windows of headquarters. Most employees rushed toward the parking garage after work. Vanessa stood beneath the entrance canopy waiting for the rain to ease. She hadn't brought an umbrella. Daniel walked outside carrying a black umbrella. He noticed her immediately. Still waiting. She nodded. I thought the rain would stop. He looked toward the road. It doesn't look like it. She laughed softly. I noticed. He held up the umbrella. I can drop you somewhere if you'd like. She hesitated. I don't want to inconvenience you. It's not an inconvenience. I pass through the city anyway. After a moment, she accepted. Thank you. Daniel's car wasn't expensive. It was a clean, well-maintained silver sedan that had clearly been driven for several years. Vanessa found herself smiling. Almost every executive she had observed drove luxury vehicles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Daniel could certainly afford something flashier. Yet nothing about him suggested he cared about appearances. As they drove through the rain-soaked streets, soft instrumental music played quietly through the speakers. Traffic crawled along slowly. Daniel glanced at her. So, what do you usually do after work? Vanessa smiled. Honestly, I mostly go home, read, cook, sleep. He laughed. That sounds surprisingly peaceful. What about you? He shrugged. Pretty much the same. I visit my grandmother every weekend. I volunteer twice a month. And I pretend I'll start exercising on Monday. Vanessa burst into laughter. I make that promise every Monday too. See, we're both terrible at keeping fitness resolutions. The conversation flowed naturally. No awkward pauses. No forced politeness. Just two people enjoying each other's company. As traffic came to another stop, Daniel asked quietly, Can I ask you something personal? Vanessa nodded. If you don't want to answer, that's all right. Go ahead. You mentioned taking care of your father. She looked out the rain-covered window. Yes. You must have loved him very much. I did. Daniel's voice softened. I can tell. She swallowed the lump forming in her throat. He taught me almost everything I know. He believed people mattered more than money. He wasn't perfect, but he always tried to do the right thing. Daniel smiled gently. He sounds like someone worth becoming. Vanessa turned toward him. What do you mean? When someone leaves behind values instead of just possessions, they're never really gone. His words struck her deeply. She remembered sitting beside her father's hospital bed only weeks before his passing. Richard had held her hand despite his weakening strength. Promise me one thing. I promise. No matter how successful you become, never become too important to listen. At the time, she hadn't fully understood. Now, she understood perfectly. Daniel noticed tears gathering in her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. She quickly wiped them away. No. You reminded me of something beautiful. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Daniel smiled. I think your father would be proud of you. Vanessa looked at him. Why? You work hard. You're kind. You never complain. And despite everything you've gone through, you still smile. She looked away before he noticed how emotional his words made her feel. If only he knew. The following Monday morning, Vanessa arrived at work earlier than usual. She noticed Grace struggling to carry several heavy boxes of cleaning supplies from the storage room. Before Vanessa could help, Daniel appeared. "Mrs. Grace, you'll hurt your back." He immediately picked up the boxes. Grace laughed. "I've been carrying these since before you joined the company." "I know, but you don't have to carry them today." He walked them all the way to the janitorial room. Grace smiled at Vanessa after he left. "That young man has a good heart." "He really does." Grace looked at her curiously. "You smile differently whenever he comes around." Vanessa nearly dropped the clipboard she was holding. "I don't know what you're talking about." Grace chuckled knowingly. "I've raised 4 children. I know that smile." Vanessa felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "We're just friends." Grace raised an eyebrow. Vanessa laughed nervously. "We are." Grace simply smiled. "We'll see." Over the following weeks, Daniel and Vanessa developed an unexpected routine. Whenever their lunch breaks matched, they ate together. If Daniel bought coffee for himself, he bought one for her too. Sometimes they walked around the company courtyard discussing books, movies, and childhood memories. Vanessa found herself revealing pieces of her real personality. Not her identity, but herself. She told him about her love of reading biographies, her fascination with architecture, her dream of someday building schools for underprivileged children. Daniel listened carefully. "You've thought about that for a long time." She nodded. "My father believed success should improve other people's lives." Daniel smiled. "I agree. What about you?" He looked toward the fountain in the courtyard. "My dream." She nodded. "I want to help build a company where people actually enjoy coming to work." Vanessa smiled. "What would that look like?" He thought for a moment. "A place where janitors aren't invisible, where security officers are respected, where interns aren't afraid, where promotions are earned, and where leaders actually know the names of the people cleaning their offices." Vanessa's heart skipped. Without realizing it, Daniel had just described the company Richard Lawson had spent decades trying to build. She whispered, "I hope you get that chance someday." Daniel smiled. "So do I." One Friday afternoon, Vanessa witnessed something that strengthened her admiration for Daniel even further. She was assigned to monitor the reception area when a delivery driver accidentally knocked over several expensive decorative vases while moving equipment. The loud crash echoed through the lobby. The frightened driver immediately apologized. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident." Before anyone else could respond, one of the senior executives stormed over. "Do you know how much those cost?" "You'll pay for every one." The driver looked horrified. "Sir, I can't afford." Daniel walked out of the elevator at that exact moment. "What happened?" The executive pointed angrily. "He destroyed company property." Daniel calmly examined the scene. Then he noticed something else. The decorative display extended into the delivery pathway. Far beyond the marked safety line, he looked at facilities. Who approved placing fragile decorations inside the loading route? No one answered. Daniel turned back to the executive. The driver followed the designated path. The display violated safety regulations. This wasn't his fault. The executive frowned. "Are you defending him?" "I'm defending fairness." After a tense silence, the executive muttered something under his breath and walked away. The delivery driver looked close to tears. "Thank you, sir." Daniel smiled. "Be more careful next time." "I will." As the driver left, Vanessa couldn't stop smiling. Daniel never looked for opportunities to impress people. He simply couldn't ignore injustice. That evening, Vanessa sat alone inside her apartment. The notebook containing evidence against Victor Kane lay open on the table. Beside it rested another notebook. This one was different. Instead of suspicious conversations and financial irregularities, it contained observations about people. Grace, Patrick, receptionists, factory workers, drivers. And Daniel. She flipped through the pages until she reached his name. The list had grown much longer than she realized. Bought lunch for a stranger. Treats every employee equally. Defends workers before checking titles. Carries boxes for elderly cleaner. Shares coffee without expecting anything. Never speaks disrespectfully. Listens before judging. She paused, then slowly wrote one final sentence beneath the others. The kind of leader my father wanted this company to have. She stared at the words for several long moments. Then she realized something that frightened her. When she first came to Lawson Manufacturing, Daniel Brooks had simply been another employee she intended to observe. Now, she looked forward to seeing him every morning. She noticed when he wasn't in the cafeteria. She smiled whenever he approached. She missed their conversations on days their schedules didn't overlap. Without meaning to, without planning to, without even realizing when it had happened, Vanessa Lawson had begun falling in love with a man who believed she was nothing more than an ordinary security guard trying to rebuild her life. And for the first time since putting on the uniform, her mission became far more complicated. Because every day she delayed revealing the truth, she wasn't just protecting her investigation. She was risking the heart of the one man whose honesty had become the brightest light inside her father's struggling company. The more Vanessa uncovered about Lawson Manufacturing Group, the more one thing became painfully clear. Victor Kane was no fool. He was patient, calculated, and dangerously observant. For months, he had carefully built an image of a loyal executive grieving the loss of his closest friend. He smiled during board meetings, spoke respectfully about Richard Lawson, and reassured investors that the company remained stable. Behind closed doors, however, he was an entirely different man. He manipulated financial records, rewarded dishonest employees with promotions, and quietly removed anyone who threatened his control. Unfortunately for Victor, one person refused to be controlled. Daniel Brooks. It began with a meeting that Daniel was never supposed to question. On a Monday morning, department managers gathered in the main conference room to review the company's quarterly production figures. Vanessa stood outside the room as part of the security detail assigned to the executive floor. The conference room doors were closed, but every time someone entered or left, voices drifted into the hallway. She recognized Daniel's calm voice. "These maintenance costs don't make sense." A brief silence followed. Then Victor responded smoothly. "What exactly concerns you?" Daniel continued. "The East factory reported replacing machines that were installed less than a year ago." Thomas Reed cleared his throat. "The reports are accurate." Daniel wasn't convinced. "I visited that factory myself last week. The machines are operating perfectly." Another uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Victor finally smiled. "I'm sure finance has an explanation." Thomas quickly nodded. "Of course." Daniel looked around the room. "I'd appreciate seeing the supporting documents." Victor's smile remained, but his eyes hardened. "We'll arrange that." The meeting continued. Vanessa couldn't hear the rest, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly what had happened. Daniel had publicly questioned fraudulent expenses, and men like Victor Kane never forgot embarrassment. Later that afternoon, Victor entered Thomas Reed's office without knocking. Thomas immediately closed the door. Victor remained standing. "We have a problem." Thomas sighed. "I know. Daniel Brooks." Victor nodded. "He's becoming far too curious." Thomas adjusted his glasses nervously. "He asks reasonable questions." "That's precisely the problem." Victor walked toward the window overlooking the city. "Employees trust him. Managers respect him. If Vanessa ever returns, who do you think she'll listen to?" Thomas remained silent. Victor turned around. "He has to go." Thomas hesitated. Firing him without cause would raise suspicion. Victor smiled slowly. "Then we'll give everyone a cause." That evening, Vanessa finished her shift just after 7 o'clock. As she walked through the employee parking lot, she noticed Daniel loading several boxes into the trunk of his car. She approached. "Need some help?" Daniel smiled. "I've almost finished." She picked up one of the smaller boxes anyway. What are these? Old files. My department is moving offices. She laughed. I thought managers had assistants for this. Daniel shook his head. I try not to make people do things I can do myself. They carried the remaining boxes together. After closing the trunk, Daniel leaned against the car. Thanks. It would have taken longer alone. Vanessa smiled. I don't mind. He looked at her thoughtfully. Can I ask you something? Of course. Have you ever felt like something wasn't right, but you couldn't prove it? Her heart skipped. What do you mean? Daniel sighed. I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things. But lately, the numbers don't match. The decisions don't make sense. And every time I ask questions, people become uncomfortable. Vanessa carefully chose her words. Maybe your instincts are trying to tell you something. Daniel smiled faintly. My instincts usually create paperwork. She laughed. I'll keep that in mind. Neither of them realized someone was watching. From the third-floor window, Victor Kane stood with folded arms. His expression was cold. He watched Daniel smiling at the young security guard. He watched them laughing together. Then he quietly walked away. The following morning, Victor summoned Margaret Pierce to his office. She entered carrying a tablet. You wanted to see me? Victor nodded. Close the door. She did. Victor spoke calmly. I need Daniel Brooks investigated. Margaret frowned. On what grounds? Victor sat behind his desk. Find something. There has to be policy violations. Margaret looked uncomfortable. Daniel has one of the cleanest employment records in the company. Victor leaned forward. Then create a reason. She hesitated. That's risky. Victor smiled. So is unemployment. Margaret immediately understood the threat. She lowered her eyes. I'll see what I can do. 3 days passed quietly. Almost too quietly. Vanessa noticed Daniel seemed unusually busy. He spent long hours reviewing reports, visiting different departments, and speaking with supervisors. She assumed he was gathering information. She wasn't wrong. Daniel had independently begun investigating several unusual maintenance expenses. He had no idea the people responsible already knew. Late Friday evening, Vanessa was assigned to monitor the executive corridor. Around 8:30 p.m., she noticed Thomas Reed leaving the finance department carrying a small brown envelope. Instead of heading toward the elevators, he quietly walked to Daniel's office. The hallway was empty. Thomas glanced both ways before unlocking Daniel's door with a master key. Vanessa immediately became alert. Why would the chief financial officer enter another manager's office after business hours? She casually walked toward the far end of the hallway, pretending to inspect fire extinguishers while keeping the office door within sight. Exactly 6 minutes later, Thomas emerged. The envelope was gone. He locked the door and hurried away. Vanessa memorized the time. 8:37 p.m. Something had just happened. She was certain of it. The following Monday began like any other. Until 10 o'clock, an email was sent to every department head. Emergency internal investigation. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Rumors spread rapidly through the building. What happened? Someone stole company money. I heard it involved operations. Vanessa felt a knot forming in her stomach. Minutes later, 2 members of internal audit entered Daniel's office. He looked genuinely confused. What is this about? One investigator placed a document on his desk. Mr. Brooks, we've discovered financial authorization forms bearing your approval. Daniel frowned. I've never seen these. The investigator opened the folder. Several documents carried Daniel's electronic signature. He stared at them in disbelief. These aren't mine. Thomas Reed entered moments later. His expression appeared sympathetic. I'm sorry, Daniel, but nearly $3 million cannot be accounted for. The office fell silent. Daniel looked around. This is impossible. Victor arrived shortly afterward. His face reflected carefully rehearsed disappointment. Daniel, I never expected this. Daniel stood. I didn't authorize any of these payments. Victor sighed. Then how do you explain your signature? I can't. Because I didn't sign them. Thomas shook his head sadly. The system logs show they originated from your office computer. Daniel looked stunned. I was on leave that day. Thomas opened another file. According to HR records, you were present. Daniel turned toward Margaret. She lowered her eyes. Vanessa watched everything from the hallway. Every expression, every word, every lie. She suddenly remembered Thomas entering Daniel's office after hours. The envelope, the master key, the 6-minute visit. This had been planned. News spread through headquarters within an hour. Employees whispered in corridors. I can't believe Daniel would steal. I always trusted him. I knew something was strange. Others refused to believe it. Daniel? Never. There has to be an explanation. Grace approached Vanessa during lunch. Her face looked pale. This can't be true. Vanessa answered quietly. It isn't. Grace looked surprised. You sound certain. I am. Grace searched her face. How do you know? Vanessa hesitated. I just do. That afternoon Daniel was escorted into a formal disciplinary hearing. Several executives sat around a long table. Victor presided over the meeting. Thomas presented the alleged evidence. Printed invoices, electronic signatures, bank transfers. Everything appeared convincing. Victor folded his hands. Daniel, if you cooperate, the company may choose not to involve the police. Daniel looked around the room. His expression remained calm despite everything. I didn't steal anything. Thomas sighed dramatically. The evidence disagrees. Daniel shook his head. Then the evidence has been manipulated. Victor leaned back. Can you prove that? Daniel remained silent for several seconds. No, I can't. Victor nodded slowly. Then perhaps you should admit your mistake. Daniel looked directly into Victor's eyes. I won't confess to something I didn't do. Victor's voice became colder. You understand the consequences? I do. You'll lose your position. I know. You may never work in management again. Daniel nodded. I know. Victor waited. Daniel finally spoke. I'd rather lose my career than keep my job by telling a lie. The room fell silent. Even several executives looked uncomfortable. Vanessa stood outside the conference room listening through the slightly open door. Her eyes filled with tears. Daniel had been given an easy escape, a false confession, a quiet resignation. Instead, he chose truth, even if it destroyed his future. At that moment, Vanessa no longer admired him simply because he was kind. She admired him because integrity meant more to him than success. By evening, Daniel was officially suspended pending the completion of the investigation. He quietly packed a small box containing family photographs, notebooks, and a framed certificate recognizing 10 years of service. Employees watched silently as he walked through the office. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked genuinely heartbroken. Grace hugged him tightly. I know you didn't do this. Daniel smiled sadly. Thank you. Patrick shook his hand. We'll miss you. Daniel nodded. So will I. As he approached the lobby doors, his eyes met Vanessa's. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, she stepped closer. I'm sorry. Daniel smiled weakly. It's not your fault. I'll prove the truth eventually. Vanessa looked at him with quiet determination. Yes, you will. He walked toward the parking lot carrying the small cardboard box that contained everything left of his career. Vanessa watched until his car disappeared through the company gates. Then she turned toward the surveillance office. Her mind was racing. Thomas had entered Daniel's office after hours. The security cameras would have recorded it. If the footage still existed, could expose everything. For the first time since beginning her undercover mission, Vanessa wasn't simply gathering evidence anymore. She was racing against time. Because if Victor Kane had framed Daniel once, there was no telling how far he would go to ensure the truth never came to light. The suspension changed everything. For the first time in nearly 3 months, Daniel Brooks was no longer walking through the halls of Lawson Manufacturing Group. His office remained locked. His desk sat untouched. The familiar smile that greeted receptionists every morning had disappeared. Even the atmosphere inside the company felt different. Employees spoke in whispers. Some believed the accusations against him. Others refused to accept them. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. The company no longer felt like the place Richard Lawson had built. Vanessa noticed the difference immediately. Without Daniel's quiet optimism, the building felt colder. Managers barked orders more openly. Victor Kane moved through the corridors with growing confidence. Thomas Reed no longer bothered hiding his smug expression. It was as if Daniel's absence had removed the last obstacle standing between them and complete control. Vanessa clenched her jaw every time she saw them. She knew Daniel had been framed. She just had to prove it. That evening, after finishing her shift, Vanessa stood outside the company gates waiting for the city bus. Dark clouds drifted across the sky, carrying the promise of another storm. Her phone buzzed. She stared at the screen. It was a message from Daniel. "Thank you for believing me today." She smiled despite herself. After a moment, she replied, "You never gave me a reason not to." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Would you like to have coffee tomorrow? As friends?" Vanessa stared at the words. Her heart beat a little faster. She knew spending more time with Daniel was dangerous. Every conversation made it harder to keep her identity secret. But another part of her, the part that had begun looking forward to his smile every day, didn't want to say no. She typed a simple reply. "I'd like that." The following afternoon they met at a small neighborhood cafe several streets away from Lawson Manufacturing. It was nothing like the luxurious restaurants Vanessa had grown up visiting. The tables were wooden. The chairs didn't match. Soft jazz music played quietly from an old speaker mounted on the wall. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the room. Daniel was already there when she arrived. He stood as she approached. "You found the place." She smiled. "It wasn't difficult." He pulled out a chair for her. "I come here sometimes. It's peaceful." The waitress brought 2 menus. Daniel looked at Vanessa. "What would you like?" "Anything is fine." He smiled. "I've learned that's usually not true." She laughed. "All right. A cappuccino. And that chocolate cake looks dangerous." Daniel grinned. "Then we'll share it." For a while they talked about ordinary things. Books, movies, favorite childhood memories. The conversation felt effortless, as though they had known each other for years. For the first time since Richard Lawson's death, Vanessa forgot about investigations, fraudulent invoices, and hidden identities. She simply enjoyed being herself. Not the billionaire heiress. Not the undercover security guard. Just Vanessa. Though to Daniel, she was still Nina. Eventually the conversation grew quieter. Daniel stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. "I've been thinking." "About the company?" He nodded. "I gave them almost 8 years. I honestly believed hard work would always matter." Vanessa listened carefully. "I thought if I stayed honest, if I treated people fairly, it would be enough." He smiled bitterly. "Maybe I was naive." She leaned forward. "No, you were right." He looked at her. "The world needs people like you." Daniel laughed softly. "I'm not sure Lawson Manufacturing agrees." Vanessa wished she could tell him everything. She wished she could say, "I'm the owner. I'm gathering evidence. I'm going to clear your name." Instead, she simply reached across the table. Her hand rested gently over his. "I believe you." Daniel looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes. Something changed between them. Neither of them moved away. As evening approached, they left the cafe together. The streets were busy with commuters hurrying home. Daniel glanced at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What would you do if someone lied about you?" Vanessa thought carefully. "I'd tell the truth." "And if nobody believed you?" She smiled sadly. "I'd keep telling the truth." He nodded slowly. "I suppose that's all any of us can do." Over the next 2 weeks they met several more times. Sometimes they walked through a nearby park. Sometimes they visited a bookstore. Sometimes they simply sat on a bench watching children play football. Daniel never complained. Not once. He never spoke with hatred toward Victor. He never wished revenge on anyone. Instead, he focused on moving forward. "I've started applying for other jobs," he told her one afternoon. Vanessa felt a sharp pain in her chest. "You shouldn't have to. I know. But life doesn't stop because one company disappoints you." She admired his resilience. Most people in his situation would have become bitter. Daniel remained hopeful. One Saturday morning, Daniel invited Vanessa to visit his grandmother. "I don't usually introduce people quickly." He scratched the back of his neck. "But she'd like you." Vanessa smiled nervously. "I'd love to meet her." His grandmother lived in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The small house was simple but beautifully maintained. Colorful flowers lined the front walkway. An elderly woman with warm brown eyes greeted them at the door. "There you are." She hugged Daniel tightly, then turned toward Vanessa. "So this is the young lady." Daniel laughed. "Grandma. We're friends." She smiled knowingly. I've lived long enough to know the difference." Vanessa couldn't help laughing. The old woman welcomed her inside. Lunch consisted of homemade rice, chicken stew, vegetables, and fresh fruit. Everything tasted wonderful. As they ate together, Daniel's grandmother watched the two of them carefully. "You make him smile." Vanessa looked surprised. "I do." She nodded. "He hasn't smiled like this since before all the trouble at work." Daniel looked embarrassed. "Grandma." "What?" "I'm only telling the truth." She turned toward Vanessa. "He has a good heart. Take care of it." Vanessa's smile slowly faded. If only the older woman knew. She wasn't protecting Daniel's heart. She was breaking it a little more every day by hiding who she truly was. That night Vanessa returned to her apartment carrying emotions she could no longer ignore. She stood before the bathroom mirror wearing ordinary clothes instead of her security uniform. Slowly she removed the glasses that completed her disguise. The reflection staring back at her was Vanessa Lawson, owner of Lawson Manufacturing, billionaire, future CEO. Yet the woman Daniel cared about was Nina Brooks, the security guard. She whispered to her reflection, "What am I doing?" She walked to the table where her father's letter remained carefully folded inside a drawer. She unfolded it once more. Her eyes settled on one sentence: "Trust actions more than titles." She smiled sadly. Daniel had done exactly that. He never cared about status. Never asked how much money she earned. Never questioned where she came from. He had simply accepted her. Would he feel betrayed when he learned the truth? The thought frightened her. Meanwhile, Victor Kane was becoming increasingly impatient. Inside his office, he slammed a folder onto the desk. "Why hasn't Daniel confessed?" Thomas Reed shrugged. "He insists he's innocent." Victor glared. "Innocent people become dangerous." Margaret Pierce looked uneasy. "He's applying for jobs." Victor shook his head. "No. He knows too much. We need to know what he's doing." Thomas frowned. "You want someone to watch him?" Victor smiled coldly. "Exactly. And find out who that security guard keeps meeting." Margaret looked confused. "Nina?" Victor nodded. "I've seen them together several times. People don't accidentally become that close. I want answers." Unbeknownst to Vanessa and Daniel, someone had already begun following them. Several evenings later, Daniel invited Vanessa for a walk after dinner. The city glowed beneath thousands of lights. Street musicians performed near the central square. Couples laughed while strolling hand in hand. Food vendors filled the air with the aroma of grilled meat and roasted corn. The atmosphere felt peaceful. As they crossed a small pedestrian bridge overlooking the river, rain suddenly began falling. At first it was gentle. Then within seconds, it became a heavy downpour. People scattered in every direction looking for shelter. Daniel laughed. "I think we're underprepared." Vanessa laughed too. "Just a little." They ran toward an old bus stop nearby. By the time they reached it, both were soaked. Rain hammered against the metal roof. For a few moments they simply caught their breath. Daniel looked at her. "You know, I never thanked you." "For what?" "For standing by me. Most people disappeared. You didn't." Vanessa smiled softly. "You would have done the same for me." "I would," he answered without hesitation. Their eyes met. The sounds of the city seemed to fade behind the steady rhythm of the rain. Daniel took one cautious step closer. "I've tried convincing myself this wasn't the right time." She remained silent. "I've lost my job. My future is uncertain. I probably shouldn't be thinking about relationships." He smiled nervously. "But every morning, I wonder if I'll see you. Every evening, I hope we'll talk. I keep finding reasons to buy coffee for two." Vanessa felt tears forming in her eyes. He wasn't speaking to Vanessa Lawson. He was speaking to Nina Brooks, the woman he believed worked long shifts to make ends meet. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," Daniel continued quietly, "but I know how I feel today." He took another small step forward. "I like you." "No." He laughed softly. "That's not true. I've fallen in love with you." Vanessa's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the rain. She had imagined this moment countless times. But now that it had arrived, it hurt, because she loved him too. Yet every word between them rested upon a secret. She looked into his kind, honest eyes, the same eyes that had defended strangers, protected employees, and treated everyone with dignity. Slowly she whispered, "I've been trying not to." Daniel smiled. "Trying not to what?" She laughed through her tears. "Fall in love with you." For a brief moment neither of them moved. Then Daniel gently reached for her hand. "If this is too soon." "It isn't," she answered. He slowly brushed a strand of wet hair away from her face. Then, with quiet hesitation, he kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was gentle, honest, filled with every conversation they had shared, every cup of coffee, every act of kindness, and every moment of trust they had built together. When they finally stepped apart, both were smiling. Neither noticed the dark sedan parked across the street. Inside, a man lowered a camera after taking several photographs. He picked up his phone. "Mr. Kane, it's me. I found them." There was a brief pause. Then he added, "The security guard and Daniel Brooks. They're in a relationship." Victor's voice came through the speaker, calm and dangerous. "Good. Keep watching." As the call ended, the photographer started the engine and quietly drove away into the rain. Across the street, Daniel and Vanessa remained beneath the small bus stop, completely unaware that their happiest moment together had just become another weapon in Victor Kane's growing plan. 3 months after Richard Lawson's death, Lawson Manufacturing Group stood at a crossroads. From the outside, the company appeared stronger than ever. The quarterly reports presented to shareholders showed healthy profits. The media praised acting CEO Victor Kane for providing stability during a difficult transition. Business magazines described him as the obvious choice to permanently lead the company. Investors applauded his confidence. The board admired his decisiveness. Only a handful of people knew that beneath those polished reports lay forged invoices, missing equipment, ghost employees, and millions of dollars quietly disappearing into shell companies. And only one person possessed enough evidence to expose it all: Vanessa Lawson. For weeks she had worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Every suspicious truck registration had been documented. Every late-night executive meeting had been recorded in her notebook. Copies of altered invoices had been photographed. Security logs had been duplicated. Most importantly, she had finally obtained the surveillance footage. The footage showed Thomas Reed entering Daniel Brooks' office late at night using a master access card. The timestamp matched the very evening Vanessa had witnessed him carrying the mysterious brown envelope. Even though the camera couldn't show what Thomas had placed inside the office, it proved one undeniable fact. Daniel had not been alone. Someone had entered his office after working hours. Someone with the opportunity to plant evidence. It wasn't enough to convict Thomas on its own. But together with everything else Vanessa had collected, it painted a devastating picture. The company wasn't suffering from isolated dishonesty. It was being systematically looted. That Friday evening, Vanessa sat inside Harold Bennett's office. Stacks of documents covered the conference table. Harold slowly adjusted his reading glasses as he reviewed another file. "This is extraordinary." Vanessa rubbed her tired eyes. "I wish it weren't." Harold looked at her. "You've accomplished more in 3 months than most forensic investigators could have." She smiled weakly. "I simply listened." Harold folded his hands. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing." Vanessa looked down at Richard Lawson's letter lying beside her notebook. "I understand him now." Harold nodded. "He never wanted you to inherit a title. He wanted you to understand responsibility." Silence filled the room. Finally, Harold asked the question Vanessa had been avoiding. "What about Daniel?" She closed her eyes. "I still haven't told him. He deserves the truth." "I know. But if I reveal myself now, the investigation could fall apart." Harold remained quiet. Then he spoke gently. "Unfortunately, the longer you wait, the harder forgiveness becomes." His words settled heavily in Vanessa's heart. She knew he was right. The following Monday morning, Victor Kane entered the executive boardroom with unusual confidence. The directors were already seated. Thomas Reed handed each member a presentation folder. Victor stood at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe the company is finally ready to move forward." Several board members nodded. "The uncertainty surrounding succession has lasted long enough." Another director agreed. "Investors are asking difficult questions." Victor smiled. "Exactly. I therefore recommend that the board officially appoint a permanent chief executive officer." Everyone already knew what he meant. One elderly director smiled. "You've earned it, Victor." He lowered his head modestly. "I only wish to continue Richard's legacy." The words sounded noble. The intentions behind them were anything but. After the meeting concluded, the board unanimously scheduled a special shareholders' assembly for the following Friday. The purpose was simple: officially confirm Victor Kane as CEO, exactly as he had planned. Across town, Vanessa received the news from Harold. "The meeting has been scheduled." She nodded calmly. "Good." Harold looked surprised. "You expected this?" "I was counting on it." She walked toward the window overlooking the city. "If Victor believes he's already won, he'll lower his guard." Harold smiled. "So what now?" Vanessa turned around. "Now, I finally stop hiding." The week leading up to the shareholders' meeting felt unusually tense. Employees sensed something important was coming. Rumors spread through every department. "I heard Victor is becoming CEO. Does that mean the Lawson family sold the company? What happened to Richard's daughter? No one has seen her." Some employees believed she had abandoned the company. Others claimed she lived overseas. A few insisted she had no interest in business. Vanessa quietly listened to every rumor while standing at reception in her security uniform. No one imagined they were discussing her within earshot. Grace approached during lunch. "Nina, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Grace lowered her voice. "If the owner's daughter ever comes back, I hope she's like her father." Vanessa smiled softly. "So do I." Grace sighed. "I'm afraid of what will happen if Mr. Kane takes over permanently." Vanessa gently squeezed the elderly woman's hand. "Have faith." Grace smiled. "You always say that." "This time," Vanessa replied quietly, "I really mean it." Meanwhile, Daniel's life had changed dramatically. Unable to find another management position while the investigation remained open, he accepted temporary consulting work for a small manufacturing company. The salary was modest. The office was tiny. Yet he approached the job with the same honesty and enthusiasm he had shown at Lawson Manufacturing. One afternoon his phone rang. "Nina, it's me." A smile immediately appeared on his face. "I was just thinking about you." She smiled too. "Can we meet tonight?" Of course. They met at the same quiet cafe where they had shared countless conversations. Daniel noticed she seemed distracted. "You've been somewhere else all evening." She looked at him apologetically. "I'm sorry. A lot has been happening." He reached across the table. "You don't have to carry everything alone." She looked into his eyes. There it was again. The kindness that had made her fall in love with him. She almost told him. Several times the words rose to her lips. "My name isn't Nina. I'm Vanessa Lawson. I'm the woman who owns the company that destroyed your career." But each time, she stopped herself. Not yet. Not until the truth could protect him completely. Daniel noticed her silence. "What is it?" She forced a small smile. "Promise me something. Anything. No matter what happens. Remember that everything I did for a reason." Daniel frowned. "That's an unusual promise." "I know." He gently squeezed her hand. "If it's important to you, I promise." Her eyes filled with tears. He had no idea how much those words meant. Friday finally arrived. The headquarters buzzed with activity before sunrise. Luxury vehicles filled the parking garage. Television crews assembled outside the main entrance. Journalists waited behind security barriers hoping to capture the historic transition of leadership. Inside the grand conference hall, employees filled the rear rows while shareholders occupied the front. Massive projection screens displayed the company logo. Richard Lawson's portrait stood beside the stage. Fresh white lilies surrounded it. Victor admired the room with quiet satisfaction. Everything had gone according to plan, or so he believed. Thomas leaned closer. "Everything's ready." Victor smiled. "And Vanessa?" "No sign of her." Victor laughed softly. "I didn't think so." At exactly 10 o'clock, the meeting began. One director stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new chapter in the history of Lawson Manufacturing Group." Applause echoed through the hall. He continued, "Following the unfortunate passing of our founder, the board wishes to recognize the extraordinary leadership provided by Mr. Victor Kane." More applause followed. Victor rose from his seat and adjusted his suit. He looked every bit the victorious executive. The director smiled warmly. "It is therefore my privilege to recommend Mr. Victor Kane as the next Chief Executive Officer of Lawson Manufacturing Group." The audience prepared to applaud. Then, the enormous conference hall doors slowly opened. Every head turned. A single security officer stepped inside. She wore the familiar navy blue uniform. A security cap rested neatly over her hair. An identification badge hung from her chest. Nina Brooks. Employees looked confused. Several executives frowned. One whispered, "What's security doing in here?" Victor's smile vanished. He turned toward the guards near the entrance. "Remove her." Before anyone could move, Harold Bennett calmly stood from the front row. "Allow her to proceed." Victor stared at him. "What are you doing?" Harold didn't answer. The room fell completely silent as the young security guard calmly walked down the center aisle. Each footstep echoed across the polished floor. Grace stared in confusion. Patrick blinked repeatedly. Several employees whispered to one another. Daniel wasn't present. Still suspended, he hadn't been invited to the meeting. Vanessa reached the stage. She stopped directly beneath the company logo. For a long moment, she simply looked around the room. She recognized almost every face. People who had ignored her. People who had insulted her. People who had shown kindness. People who had betrayed the company her father built. Victor finally broke the silence. "This is a shareholders' meeting. You have no business being here." Vanessa looked directly at him. For the first time since putting on the uniform, she smiled with complete confidence. Then, without saying a word, she reached up and slowly removed her security cap. Her shoulder-length hair fell neatly around her face. A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. Next came the dark-framed glasses. She removed them carefully and placed them on the podium. Gasps echoed through the room. Grace covered her mouth with both hands. Patrick took an involuntary step backward. Several executives stared in disbelief. Harold Bennett walked onto the stage carrying a leather folder. He opened it slowly before speaking into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried throughout the hall, "it is my honor to formally introduce the sole heir to the Lawson estate, the owner of 100% of Lawson Manufacturing Group." He paused, then smiled proudly. "Miss Vanessa Lawson." The hall froze. Victor Kane's face turned completely pale. Thomas Reed's folder slipped from his hands onto the floor. Margaret Pierce staggered backward into her chair. Across the room, whispers exploded into stunned disbelief. The security guard. Impossible. That was Vanessa Lawson? Grace's eyes filled with tears. Patrick stood speechless. Vanessa looked over the audience one final time. Then she stepped toward the microphone. "My father once told me that the truth about a company cannot be found in the executive offices." She looked directly at Victor. "It is found among the people everyone else overlooks." The room remained utterly silent. No one applauded. No one moved. Every person present realized the same terrifying truth. For the past 3 months, the billionaire heiress they had been waiting for had been standing among them every single day, watching, listening, learning, and now, she was ready to reveal everything. The conference hall remained frozen in stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on the young woman standing confidently behind the podium. Only moments earlier, she had been known to everyone as Nina Brooks, the quiet security guard who greeted employees at the front entrance every morning. Now they knew the truth. She was Vanessa Lawson, the billionaire heiress, the sole owner of Lawson Manufacturing Group, the daughter of the man whose portrait overlooked the hall from the stage. Victor Kane felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully rehearsed acceptance speech suddenly felt meaningless. Thomas Reed stared at Vanessa as though he had seen a ghost. Margaret Pierce gripped the edge of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Grace Wilson, the elderly cleaner, wiped tears from her cheeks. Patrick, the senior security officer who had trained Vanessa, shook his head in disbelief. I trained the owner," he whispered to himself. The room erupted into whispers. "She was working security? How is that possible? When did she arrive? Was she really here all this time?" Vanessa waited patiently. She allowed the shock to settle. Then she reached into a leather folder Harold Bennett had placed on the podium. "My father once told me," she began calmly, "that a company's greatest strength isn't found in its buildings." She looked around the room. "It is found in its people." He also warned me that titles often hide the truth. So before accepting the privilege of leading this company, I decided to understand it. She paused. I chose to understand it from the ground floor. Several employees lowered their eyes. They suddenly remembered every time they had ignored the quiet security guard. Every dismissive glance. Every careless remark. Every opportunity they had failed to show basic kindness. Vanessa continued. "For 3 months, I worked among security officers. I shared meals in the employee cafeteria. I walked the factory floors. I spoke with cleaners. I listened to drivers. I observed managers. And I discovered 2 very different companies." Her voice remained steady. One company was built on honesty, hard work, and respect. The other was built on greed. Her eyes settled on Victor Kane. "And today, I'm here to expose it." Victor quickly stood. "This is outrageous." He forced a laugh. "Vanessa, we're all happy you've returned. But grief has clearly affected your judgment." Several board members looked uncertain. Victor continued confidently. "You've misunderstood routine business decisions. You've been working as a security guard. You don't understand executive management." Vanessa smiled faintly. "No, I understand it far better than you realize." She opened another folder. "Because while I was working as a security guard, I was watching." The giant projection screens behind the stage suddenly lit up. The first image appeared. A photograph of a transfer document authorizing expensive machinery to be moved to a private storage facility. Another image followed. Then another. Then another. Rows of invoices filled the screens. Thomas Reed swallowed hard. Vanessa spoke clearly. Over the last 3 months, 32 pieces of industrial equipment were transferred to private facilities unrelated to Lawson Manufacturing. The total estimated value exceeds $18 million. Murmurs spread across the audience. She changed the slide. Next. Ghost employees. A spreadsheet appeared. These individuals have received salaries for over 2 years. She pointed toward several highlighted names. The problem? They don't exist. More shocked whispers. Another slide. Inflated maintenance contracts. Duplicate invoices. Forged supplier agreements. Payments to shell companies. The evidence seemed endless. Every page painted the same picture. Systematic theft. Victor interrupted angrily. These are accusations. They prove nothing. Vanessa looked toward Harold. The elderly lawyer nodded. Perhaps you're right. She pressed a small remote. The screen changed again. Security camera footage began playing. The timestamp read, Friday, 8:31 p.m. The audience watched Thomas Reed glance nervously down an empty hallway. He unlocked Daniel Brooks' office using a master key. He entered carrying a brown envelope. 6 minutes later, he exited without it. Gasps echoed throughout the conference hall. Thomas stood abruptly. That footage has been manipulated. Vanessa calmly replied. It was copied directly from the company's original surveillance server. She turned toward Patrick. Patrick. The senior security officer stood immediately. Yes, Miss Lawson. Can security footage stored on the central server be altered without leaving a digital record? Patrick answered confidently. No. Every modification creates an audit trail. Vanessa nodded. And were any modifications made? Patrick looked toward the company's head of information technology, who had already reviewed the files that morning. The IT director stood. No. The footage is authentic. Thomas slowly sat back down. Sweat formed across his forehead. Vanessa continued. The following Monday, fraudulent financial documents bearing Daniel Brooks' electronic signature suddenly appeared. She changed the slide once more. Another image filled the screen. Access logs. Electronic keycard records. Computer login histories. She calmly explained each one. Daniel's office computer was remotely accessed after business hours. The access originated from finance. Thomas closed his eyes. He knew it was over. Victor suddenly slammed his hand onto the table. This proves nothing. Vanessa looked directly at him. You're right. So let's continue. Another recording began. This time, audio. Victor's own voice echoed throughout the conference hall. As long as she stays away, this company is practically ours. The room became deathly silent. Another voice. Thomas Reed. The numbers are becoming difficult to hide. Victor replied. Then hide them better. Another voice. Margaret Pierce. And Daniel Brooks? Victor answered coldly. He'll never support us. Then we'll make sure no one trusts him. Several board members stared at Victor in horror. The recording ended. No one spoke. No one needed an explanation. They had all heard it themselves. Victor slowly stood. His calm mask finally disappeared. You recorded private conversations. Vanessa answered evenly. I documented criminal conspiracies. Victor pointed at her angrily. You had no right. She looked him directly in the eyes. I own this company. I had every right to protect it. Applause broke out. It began with a single employee. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall echoed with thunderous applause. Not for revenge. For truth. Grace stood first. Tears streamed down her face as she applauded harder than anyone. Patrick joined. Receptionists. Factory supervisors. Engineers. Warehouse workers. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. Victor looked around the room. For the first time, he realized he had lost. The conference hall doors opened. Several police officers entered accompanied by investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit. The lead detective approached the stage. "Miss Lawson." She handed him a thick folder. "Everything is here. Financial records, digital evidence, recorded conversations, witness statements." The detective accepted the file. "Thank you." He turned toward Victor Kane. "Mr. Victor Kane, you are under arrest for fraud, criminal conspiracy, embezzlement, and falsification of corporate records." Victor stared at him. "This is absurd." The detective continued. "Thomas Reed, you are under arrest." Thomas quietly lowered his head. Margaret Pierce began crying. "I only followed instructions." The detective looked at her. "You can explain that during questioning." Handcuffs clicked loudly inside the silent conference hall. Employees watched as the three executives who had ruled through fear were escorted toward the exit. Victor stopped beside Vanessa. His expression burned with hatred. "You think you've won?" Vanessa remained calm. "No, I think justice has." Without another word, the officers led him away. Several hours later, the shareholders unanimously voted. Every fraudulent decision made under Victor Kane's authority was immediately suspended. An emergency audit was approved. The disciplinary action against Daniel Brooks was declared invalid pending formal review. Vanessa officially assumed the position of Chief Executive Officer. Yet, despite everything that had happened, one person was missing: Daniel. That evening, Harold suggested inviting Daniel to headquarters. "He deserves to hear the truth." Vanessa nodded. "I'll go myself." She drove alone, not in the luxury limousine waiting at the mansion. Instead, she drove the modest sedan she had secretly purchased while living undercover. She found Daniel sitting outside his grandmother's house. He looked surprised. "Nina?" She stepped out of the car. "We need to talk." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd come." As they walked slowly through the quiet neighborhood, Daniel noticed she seemed unusually nervous. "What's wrong?" She stopped beneath a large tree. There was no easy way to begin. She took a deep breath. "My name isn't Nina." Daniel frowned. "What?" She looked into his eyes. "My real name is Vanessa. Vanessa Lawson." Silence. He stared at her, confused, trying to understand. Then realization slowly spread across his face. "No." She nodded. "Yes. The owner of Lawson Manufacturing. The woman everyone's been looking for. The security guard." They were the same person. Daniel stepped backward. His breathing became shallow. "No. This doesn't make sense." "It does." She quietly explained everything. Her father's letter, the undercover plan, the investigation, the evidence, every conversation, every reason she had kept the secret. When she finally finished, several long minutes passed. Daniel looked away. "So every lunch, every conversation, every coffee, you were studying me?" Pain filled Vanessa's eyes. "No. At first, yes. I was observing everyone. But somewhere along the way, that changed." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You should have told me. I wanted to, many times. But every day it became harder." His voice grew quieter. "I trusted you. You did. And I betrayed that trust." Tears rolled down Vanessa's face. "I'm so sorry." Daniel looked at her one last time, then quietly turned away. "I need time." Without waiting for an answer, he walked slowly down the street. Vanessa remained standing beneath the tree, watching the man she loved disappear into the evening. She had reclaimed her father's company. She had exposed corruption. She had restored justice. But victory suddenly felt incomplete, because the one person whose forgiveness mattered most had walked away with a broken heart. The morning after Victor Kane's arrest, Lawson Manufacturing Group felt like an entirely different company. News of the dramatic shareholders' meeting had spread across the country overnight. Every major television station carried the story. Billionaire heiress exposes multi-million-dollar corporate fraud while working undercover as a security guard. Business newspapers called it one of the boldest corporate investigations in recent history. Social media exploded with discussions. Some praised Vanessa Lawson's courage. Others couldn't believe that the owner of a billion-dollar company had spent 3 months working as a security guard. But inside Lawson Manufacturing, the attention of the outside world mattered very little. Employees were still trying to process what had happened. The quiet security guard who greeted them every morning, the woman many had ignored, the one who patiently checked visitor badges and held doors open, she was now sitting in the executive office that had once belonged to Richard Lawson. Vanessa stood alone inside her father's office. Nothing had changed. His books remained neatly arranged. His favorite fountain pen still rested on the polished desk. A framed photograph of the two of them during the opening of the company's second factory stood exactly where he had left it. She picked up the picture and smiled through her tears. "You were right, Dad." She looked around the office. "When I first thought about becoming CEO, I imagined this room would make me feel powerful." She laughed quietly. "It doesn't. It makes me feel responsible." She carefully placed the photograph back on the desk. Then she walked toward the large window overlooking the company headquarters. Employees were arriving for work. Cleaners, receptionists, technicians, drivers, security officers. 3 months earlier she had stood among them wearing the same navy blue uniform. Now she finally understood what her father had tried to teach her all those years. Leadership wasn't about occupying the highest office. It was about understanding the people who made the company possible. At exactly 9 o'clock, Harold Bennett entered carrying a stack of files. "Good morning, Miss Lawson." Vanessa smiled. "You've known me since I was 5. You can call me Vanessa." Harold chuckled. "I'll try." He placed the files on her desk. "The emergency audit has already begun." "Good. The board also approved your first executive meeting." "When?" "In 30 minutes." She nodded. "Perfect." As Harold prepared to leave, Vanessa stopped him. "Harold." "Yes. I want every employee invited to tomorrow's town hall." He looked surprised. "Every employee?" "Yes." "Factory workers too?" "Especially factory workers." He smiled proudly. "Your father would have done the same." The executive meeting began precisely at 9:30. The atmosphere felt very different from previous meetings. The seats once occupied by Victor Kane, Thomas Reed, and Margaret Pierce remained empty. Several department heads looked nervous. Vanessa entered wearing a simple navy business suit. No expensive jewelry. No dramatic entrance. She simply greeted everyone politely before taking her seat. "Good morning." The executives stood respectfully. She gestured for them to sit. "I'll keep this brief." She looked around the table. "For too long, this company rewarded fear. That ends today." Everyone listened carefully. "Beginning immediately, there will be complete financial transparency. Independent audits every quarter. Anonymous reporting for unethical behavior. No employee will lose their job without a fair investigation." Several managers exchanged surprised glances. Vanessa continued. "Promotions will be based on merit, not personal relationships." She paused. "Finally, if anyone believes their title makes them more valuable than another employee, they're welcome to resign." Silence filled the room. Then one senior manager slowly nodded. "So are we." Vanessa smiled. "I hope so." The following afternoon, nearly every employee gathered inside the company's largest auditorium. Factory workers sat beside engineers, receptionists beside department managers, security officers beside accountants. For the first time in years, there were no reserved seating sections based on rank. Grace sat in the front row. Patrick sat beside her. Both still looked overwhelmed whenever they saw Vanessa. The applause that greeted her as she stepped onto the stage lasted several minutes. She smiled warmly before raising her hand. The room gradually became quiet. "I want to begin by saying thank you." She looked toward the audience. "Thank you to every employee who continued doing the right thing even when it wasn't easy." She turned toward Grace. "Mrs. Grace." The elderly cleaner looked startled. "You once told me that when a building starts cracking, it's because the foundation is weakening." Grace smiled shyly. You were right. The audience applauded. Vanessa continued. Our foundation wasn't our buildings. It was our values. And together, we're going to rebuild them. She then announced a series of immediate reforms. Every cleaner would receive improved healthcare benefits. Security officers would receive salary increases and advanced training opportunities. Internship programs would become paid positions. Employee appreciation awards would include every department, not just management. When she finished, many employees were openly crying. Grace wiped away tears. Patrick shook his head in amazement. I never imagined I'd see this day. Later that week, Vanessa visited the security office. The room immediately fell silent when she entered. Patrick stood so quickly that his chair almost tipped over. Miss Lawson, she laughed. Please. I was Nina for 3 months. You don't have to be so formal. The room relaxed slightly. Vanessa looked around. I came to thank all of you. Patrick smiled. You worked harder than half our recruits. Several guards laughed. Another joked. You still owe us 1 shift. Vanessa laughed with them. Maybe someday. She handed Patrick an envelope. What's this? He opened it slowly. His eyes widened. Promotion. Patrick had been appointed regional head of corporate security. He looked speechless. I don't know what to say. Say yes. He smiled broadly. Yes. The room erupted into applause. Grace was the next person Vanessa visited. The elderly cleaner was polishing windows when Vanessa approached. Grace immediately set her cloth aside. You shouldn't be here. Vanessa smiled. Why not? You're the CEO. And you're my friend. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Vanessa handed her another envelope. Grace opened it carefully. Inside was a retirement package unlike anything she had imagined. Full pension, lifetime health care, paid vacation, and funding to renovate her home. Grace covered her mouth. I don't deserve this. Vanessa gently hugged her. My father always said you deserved much more than you received. Grace began crying. So did you. Yet despite all the positive changes, one thing continued to trouble Vanessa. Daniel. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since he learned the truth. He hadn't answered her calls. He hadn't replied to her messages. He hadn't visited headquarters. She understood. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired overnight. Still, she missed him. Every morning she found herself looking toward the cafeteria window where they had shared lunch. Every afternoon she remembered the courtyard bench where they drank coffee. Every evening she thought about the rainy bus stop where he had kissed her. Success felt strangely empty without him. One afternoon Harold quietly entered her office. I have some news. Vanessa looked up hopefully. Daniel. Harold nodded. He requested a meeting. Her heart immediately raced. When? Now. Daniel stood quietly inside one of the smaller conference rooms overlooking the company gardens. He wore the same simple white shirt Vanessa remembered. When she entered, he turned toward her. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Daniel smiled softly. You look different. She laughed nervously. No security uniform. I almost didn't recognize you. She looked down. I understand if you're still angry. Daniel shook his head. I was. He walked slowly toward the window. For several days, I kept asking myself the same question. Which one? Whether I had fallen in love with Nina or Vanessa. He turned back toward her. Then I realized something. She waited silently. They're the same person. You laughed at terrible jokes. You cared about people. You cried when talking about your father. You listened. You bought coffee even when it was my turn. He smiled. The woman I loved didn't disappear. She simply had another name. Tears filled Vanessa's eyes. I'm so sorry. I know. I should have trusted you. Daniel nodded. You should have. He paused. But I also understand why you didn't. He reached into his pocket and unfolded Richard Lawson's letter. Harold had given him a copy earlier that day. I read your father's words. He would have done exactly what you did. Vanessa wiped away a tear. You read it. He nodded. And suddenly, everything made sense. I wasn't being manipulated. You were trying to protect the company. And somewhere along the way, you accidentally fell in love. She laughed through her tears. Accidentally? He smiled. I did too. Silence settled between them. This time, felt peaceful. Daniel took one step closer. I have one condition. She looked at him curiously. What is it? No more secrets. She nodded immediately. No more secrets. He extended his hand. Deal? Instead of shaking it, Vanessa wrapped her arms around him. He hugged her tightly. Neither cared that several employees walking through the garden outside noticed. For the first time since Richard Lawson's death, everything finally felt right. 6 months later, Lawson Manufacturing celebrated the reopening of its newly renovated headquarters. The company had returned to profitability. Employee satisfaction reached its highest level in decades. The independent audit recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets. Former employees who had resigned under Victor Kane's leadership began returning. The culture had changed. Respect had replaced fear. Trust had replaced silence. Hope had replaced uncertainty. During the celebration, Vanessa stood before hundreds of employees. I have one final announcement. She smiled toward Daniel standing beside Harold. Daniel Brooks has officially accepted the position of Chief Operating Officer. Thunderous applause filled the hall. Daniel walked onto the stage. Instead of making a speech, he reached into his suit pocket. Vanessa's eyes widened. No! He smiled. Oh yes. He knelt on one knee. The entire auditorium gasped. Vanessa Lawson. I fell in love with a security guard. I discovered she was a billionaire. But neither of those things matter. The only thing that has ever mattered is the woman who taught me that true leadership begins with humility. He opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a beautiful diamond ring. Will you marry me? Vanessa's eyes overflowed with tears. She laughed. She cried. Then she nodded. Yes. Yes, I will. The auditorium erupted with cheers. Grace cried openly in the front row. Patrick wiped away tears while pretending something had gotten into his eye. Harold smiled proudly. As Daniel slipped the ring onto Vanessa's finger, she looked toward the large portrait of her father hanging above the stage. His familiar smile seemed almost alive. She whispered softly so only she could hear. We did it, Dad. Not because the company was profitable again. Not because corruption had been defeated. Not because she had become CEO. She had fulfilled the lesson Richard Lawson spent a lifetime teaching. A great company is never built by one extraordinary leader. It is built by ordinary people who are treated with extraordinary respect. And as applause echoed throughout the hall, Vanessa realized her greatest inheritance had never been the billions her father left behind. It had been his values. Those values had guided her through grief, uncovered the truth, restored justice, and led her to the one man who loved her long before he knew she was the billionaire heiress. Together, they would ensure that every person who walked through the doors of Lawson Manufacturing, whether a cleaner, a security guard, an intern, or a senior executive, would always be treated with the dignity they deserved, because that was the legacy Richard Lawson had entrusted to his daughter. And it was a legacy she would proudly protect for the rest of her life. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from.